what we do, we hope, contributes to the monarchy and the way in which it can convey continuity.
Queen Elizabeth may be dead. However, her words still meant authority in the royal household. Right now, something profound has surfaced from the dead monarch, a letter. This time, it wasn't addressed to King Charles, Williams, or Princess Anne, her only daughter. Instead, the Queen dropped an important message about Catherine. The content was so heavy, leaving William and King Charles speechless. What has the Queen written? Let's find out. The letter no one knew existed. It was late in the evening when Princess Anne opened the drawer she hadn't touched since her mother's passing. A thick velvet box, a few handwritten notes, and then an envelope, cream-colored, marked only with her name in the Queen's distinct handwriting. Anne paused. She had seen this envelope before, the day her mother gave it to her in the quiet of Balmoral. For when the crown feels the weight, the Queen had said softly. Anne had tucked it away, unsure when that moment would come. But now, months into Charles's reign, the unrest in the country was unmistakable. Headlines questioned the monarchy's future. Whispers filled parliament halls and social circles. Even loyalists were growing uneasy. Something was shifting. Her hands moved with purpose as she opened the envelope, though her heart beat louder than she'd expected. The letter inside was brief, 4 paragraphs written in the Queen's usual steady script. But it wasn't the length that struck Anne. It was the message. There was no mention of Charles, no instructions about succession. Instead, the letter spoke of Catherine, not just as William's wife or the Princess of Wales, but as the heart of the monarchy's future. If the people ever lose trust in the crown, the Queen had written, look to Catherine. She carries the quiet grace that endures storms, not because she seeks the throne, but because she understands its weight without demanding its power. Anne sat still, staring at the page, reading it again and again. She could almost hear her mother's voice behind the words. It wasn't a command. It was a torch being passed, and she had been chosen to carry the message when the moment was right. Anne had always known her mother didn't make decisions lightly. If she put these words in writing, it was because she had seen something no one else did. Catherine wasn't born royal. She hadn't grown up with titles or tutors, but she had earned the people's affection with quiet consistency. And the Queen, in her final wisdom, had seen the strength in that. Now, Anne felt the burden settle. This wasn't just a letter. It was a turning point. She closed the envelope gently and pressed it against her chest. The monarchy was wobbling, and the people were restless. It was time. She would call Charles and William, but they had no idea what she was about to show them. A room without advisors. The invitation was brief and handwritten. Princess Anne's request for a private meeting at Balmoral. No aides, no palace staff, no cameras, just the 3 of them. King Charles, Prince William, and their sister. Charles found it strange, but Anne's tone had been firm. William didn't question it either. If Anne called, you showed up. The room was cold, as old royal rooms often are, with high ceilings and walls lined with ancestral portraits that seemed to watch in silence. Anne arrived last, holding a plain folder. Her expression was unreadable. She greeted them politely, but wasted no time. After a moment of stillness, she walked to the long oak table and set the folder down. Neither Charles nor William moved. They waited. There's something I need to share, she said quietly. From Mother, the tension that had already been humming in the room seemed to harden in that instant. Charles's eyes narrowed, searching her face. William leaned forward, confused. Anne opened the folder slowly, as though the letter inside might shatter from the air. She didn't sit. Instead, she carefully unfolded the aged paper and looked at both of them. This was given to me before she died, she said. She asked me to share it only when the monarchy felt unsteady. William tilted his head, suddenly alert. What is it? Anne didn't answer right away. She simply slid the letter across the table. Charles reached it first, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. William leaned closer, eyes scanning each word. Silence stretched between them, thick and fragile. The Queen's handwriting was unmistakable, but it was the name inside that made William sit back in disbelief. Catherine. Neither man spoke. Charles blinked. William stared at the page like it had rewritten his life in an instant. The letter wasn't about them, it was about her. Anne said nothing, allowing them space to absorb the shock. She knew this was not what they had expected. Her mother had always believed in order, in tradition, but this was something different. It was a message about who should lead hearts when titles no longer held weight. Finally, Charles looked up. Why her? Anne met his gaze evenly. Because Mother believed she was the only one who wouldn't try to wear the crown, yet could carry everything it stands for. Outside the old stone walls, Balmoral was quiet, but inside, the future of the monarchy had just changed, and no one dared move. Catherine's name in Her Majesty's hand. Charles reread the letter, jaw clenched. The room had shifted. The weight of the crown, once symbolic, now felt heavier than ever. The Queen's words were gentle, but clear. Catherine has something the rest of us never learned: how to lead without being seen. If the people lose trust, give them someone they already believe in. William sat frozen, unable to form words. He had always known his grandmother admired Catherine, but this was something else. It wasn't just admiration, it was trust. Trust in a woman who had never been trained to rule, yet somehow managed to hold the public's affection with effortless grace. Charles's hands trembled slightly as he folded the letter. "This isn't how it works," he said, his voice stiff. Anne didn't flinch. "I know, but she believed it's how it should be." William finally spoke, his voice rough. "Why didn't she tell me?" Anne hesitated. "Maybe she thought you weren't ready, or maybe she thought telling you would have changed how you saw Catherine." Charles stood, pacing slowly. "This letter, it suggests we push aside the heir." "No," Anne corrected gently. "It suggests we elevate someone who can help the heir, who can steady what's shaking." The words hung in the air like fog. No one dared say the obvious, that the Queen's final message implied a deep fear, that the monarchy, if left in its current hands, might not survive the generation ahead. Anne took the letter back and folded it slowly, reverently. She didn't write this to cause division, she said. She wrote it because she saw something none of us wanted to admit. The world is changing, and the crown must find someone who understands both tradition and transition. William stared out the window. He thought of Catherine at home, reading bedtime stories to their children, unaware that her name now sat like thunder on a page between kings. His fingers tapped the table softly. "She'll be frightened." Anne smiled faintly. "Then that's how you'll know she's the right one." The silence returned, not as confusion now, but contemplation. William didn't argue. Charles didn't protest, because somewhere deep inside, they both knew something profound had happened. The Queen's voice was gone, but her vision for the future now had a name. William's heartbeat stops. William left the room without a word, not in anger, but in disbelief. The letter echoed in his mind with every step. Catherine? His Catherine? The one who had never chased power? The one who still felt uncomfortable wearing tiaras? He walked out to the Balmoral Gardens and let the wind hit his face. It did nothing to clear the storm inside. He thought about their first days together at university, when Catherine was just a girl who laughed too easily and wore jumpers that didn't match. She had never once treated him like a prince. She had never once acted like a queen. And maybe that's why everyone loved her. But that love now felt like pressure. If this letter reached the wrong ears, if the public knew what the Queen had written, it could tear everything apart. Or worse, it could crown Catherine with a weight she never wanted. Back inside, Charles remained seated. Anne had left the letter on the table. He looked at it again. It burned. "She bypassed me," he said softly. "No," Anne replied. "She bypassed protocol, not you." Charles's shoulders sagged. "Is there even a difference anymore?" William returned after several minutes, his expression unreadable. He didn't sit. "Has anyone else seen it?" he asked. "No one," Anne replied. "Don't show her yet," he said, voice low. "Not yet," Anne nodded. "It's your call." They sat in silence again. The wind outside rattled the windows. Something was breaking, not between them, but around them. The monarchy had always survived storms, but never a moment like this. Never a moment when the Queen's voice reached beyond the grave and pointed to a future none of them had prepared for. Catherine had never asked for this, but maybe, just maybe, That was why she was meant to have it. Charles's quiet resistance. Charles sat alone after Anne and William left, the letter still in front of him, his hands folded neatly, the way he was taught, but inside, everything was unraveling. He couldn't decide what felt worse, the Queen's silence before her death, or her final words now. Catherine, a woman with no royal blood, a woman the world loved but he had never fully understood. His mother had bypassed every rule to place her in the center of the monarchy's future, and she had entrusted Anne, not him, with that truth. He felt betrayed, yet something deeper stirred beneath the surface. Fear, not of Catherine, but of what her rise could mean. He had waited his whole life to be king. He had studied, sacrificed, endured criticism and scrutiny, and now, barely into his reign, his own mother was suggesting the solution might lie elsewhere. He poured himself a drink and stared at the golden liquid. Everything he'd worked for, the crown, the public's trust, the institution, suddenly felt fragile, all because of one letter. Anne had said nothing cruel, but her words cut deep. She didn't write this to cause division. She saw something we didn't want to admit. He rubbed his temples, closing his eyes. He wasn't angry at Catherine. She had never overstepped, never once acted entitled. That was what made this worse. Because deep down, Charles knew the Queen was right, but he also knew the public wouldn't accept change quietly. Not again. The wounds from Diana's tragedy, Harry's departure, and his own missteps had barely begun to heal. To back Catherine now, to elevate her more than tradition allowed, could unravel what little authority he had left. Yet to ignore the Queen's words would be to dishonor her legacy. And so Charles sat, crown on his head, doubt in his heart, and a single letter between past and future. Everything depended on what they chose next. Catherine, still unaware. While storm clouds gathered quietly inside Balmoral's thick stone walls, Catherine remained untouched by the tension. In a warm room filled with the soft chatter of children, she knelt beside Prince George, helping him fold his pajamas. Charlotte was giggling from behind the curtain, and little Louis clutched a book, begging for just one more bedtime story. She was in her element, barefoot, makeup long washed off, her hair tied back loosely. This was the version of Catherine the world never saw. No pearls, no press, just a mother, tucking her children in and humming softly under her breath. She hadn't a clue that her name had just changed everything. As she carried a basket of folded laundry to the hallway, she paused by the window. The wind had picked up. Fog rolled in from the moors like a whispered warning. A strange restlessness settled in her chest. She didn't know why. She made herself a cup of tea and sat near the fire, a book open but unread in her lap. Her thoughts drifted to William. He had seemed distant lately, not cold, but preoccupied. Something heavy was in the air between them, unspoken, but real. In the next wing of the estate, her name was being debated in a room filled with royal silence and ancestral pressure. Her legacy was being discussed without her knowing. Catherine had never dreamed of crowns. Even after marrying William, she had often questioned whether she was cut out for royal life. The public duties, the scrutiny, the isolation. But she never let it show. She always smiled, always stood when needed. And somehow, over the years, the public didn't just tolerate her, they trusted her. She had become the quiet thread stitching the royal family together. And the Queen had seen it. Now, as Catherine sipped her tea and gently placed the cup down, she looked toward the window again. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, calm, unaware. She had no idea that just down the corridor, a letter written by the late Queen Elizabeth had named her not just a consort, but a cornerstone. The crown she never asked for was whispering her name. But for now, Catherine simply gathered the children's toys, folded a blanket, and turned off the lights, still unaware that history was shifting just beyond her door. A look back at Catherine's journey. Princess Anne sat in her study the next morning, the Queen's letter on her desk. The candle beside it burned low, a pool of wax forming at its base. Her mind wandered back to countless conversations with her mother. Quiet ones, late-night ones, the kind filled with pauses and glances more than words. Queen Elizabeth had always observed people before judging them. and she had watched Catherine for years, not just as William's wife, but as a woman navigating an impossible world. Anne remembered how skeptical many had been when Kate Middleton entered the picture. The tabloids, the critics, the public, no one expected her to last, but she had. And she hadn't just endured, she had grown. Anne thought back to Catherine's early appearances, how she had stood beside William with composure, even when the press dissected her every outfit, gesture, and glance. She never responded in bitterness. She simply kept showing up. Grace under pressure, Elizabeth had called it. And then there was Catherine's work. The visits to hospitals long after the media had gone. The mental health initiatives she led with William and Harry. The charities for children. The quiet gestures like donating her hair to cancer patients. Small acts the public barely noticed, but the Queen had. She never made it about her. Anne remembered her mother saying once, "That's how you know she's worthy." The Queen had seen something deeper in Catherine. A strength not born of royalty, but of humility. Of having lived an ordinary life before stepping into an extraordinary one. Anne understood it now. The letter wasn't naming a replacement. It was named after an anchor, someone who could hold the public's trust while the monarchy searched for stability. She picked up the letter again and whispered the words she once heard the Queen say, "A crown sits easier on the head of someone who never asked for it." Catherine didn't need to be trained. She already was. Life had done that. And the Queen, in her final act of foresight, had acknowledged it. The question was no longer whether Catherine was worthy. It was whether the monarchy had the courage to let her lead. The meaning behind the message. Anne knew she had to make Charles and William see the letter for what it truly was. Not a disruption to order, but a blueprint for survival. The Queen hadn't sought to dismantle tradition, but to strengthen it through relevance. Her message about Catherine wasn't just sentimental, it was strategic. Over breakfast the next day, Anne sat again with Charles. William had gone riding, needing space. Anne didn't waste time with small talk. "Mother wasn't naming a successor," she said plainly. "She was naming a signal." Charles looked tired. "A signal of what?" "That the people are drifting," she said. "And Catherine? Catherine can bring them back." Charles rubbed his temple. "I'm not denying her value, Anne, but I'm still here. William is here. And that's exactly why she matters," Anne said softly. "You've both been weighed down by the institution. She's not. She still believes in what it can be, not just what it was." Charles looked out the window. "Do you think the people would follow her?" "They already do," Anne answered. "She doesn't ask them to. They just do." Anne slid the letter back toward him. "This isn't about titles. It's about trust. Mother knew the throne can't be carried by ceremony alone. Not anymore." Charles didn't speak. The weight of his mother's voice lingered on the page. In another corner of Balmoral, William stood in the stables, hands deep in his pockets. The wind bit at his collar. He wasn't angry. He was thinking. All his life, he had been taught to lead. But maybe leadership wasn't about being at the center. Maybe it was about knowing when to share the center. He didn't know what the future would look like, but he was beginning to understand what his grandmother had seen. The world was changing, and Catherine might be the one person who could help them meet it with dignity. The decision they must make. By evening, the three royals sat once more at the long oak table. No aides, no distractions, just the Queen's words and their silent agreement to face them. William was the first to speak. "If we acknowledge this, what she wrote, it doesn't mean Catherine becomes queen tomorrow." "No," Anne said. "It means we start showing the people what she represents." Charles looked down at the letter. His fingers traced the ink as if trying to feel Elizabeth's voice. "We don't make announcements," he said slowly. "We simply shift the lens." William nodded. "Give her space. Elevate her role. Let the public see what Mother saw," Anne added. They sat with that idea. It wasn't revolutionary. It wasn't treason. It was a quiet turn, a royal recalibration. "We have to protect her," William said quietly. "From backlash, from politics." Anne agreed. "And from us." It was a rare moment of unity. For once, not about power, but purpose. They didn't sign a document. They didn't make a decree, but they made a decision. One that would ripple through every engagement, every public appearance, every headline to come. It began now. with silence, and with Catherine. A royal shift begins in silence. Within a week, subtle changes appeared. Catherine was photographed more frequently, not staged, but natural. She was seen meeting with more charities, standing closer to key discussions, hosting foreign guests with a quiet command that turned heads. No press release explained it. No statement confirmed it. But the public noticed. She's stepping up, some said. She's leading, others whispered. The palace said nothing, but Anne smiled as she read the papers. The Queen's message was unfolding exactly as she'd envisioned. Not in noise, but in presence. Charles remained king. William, still the heir. But Catherine was becoming something else. A symbol, a steadying force. People look at her differently now. Not with curiosity, but with trust. Even the critics softened. Because Catherine didn't change who she was, she just leaned into it more. She didn't claim the spotlight. She carried it with grace. In private, she began attending more briefings, engaging in long-term planning, learning the parts of the institution hidden from public view. But she still tucked the children in, still made her own tea. She hadn't been told about the letter yet, but somehow she was living it. And across the palace, Anne watched it all, her heart quiet with peace. Her mother's voice hadn't disappeared. It was simply speaking through someone else now. The crown she never asked for. When Catherine finally learned about the letter, it wasn't from William, it was from Anne. They sat in a small sitting room, the kind not usually visited by reporters or courtiers. Anne placed the letter in Catherine's hands with gentle care. "She wanted you to have this," Anne said. Catherine unfolded the paper slowly, her hands trembling. As she read the words, her eyes filled, not with pride, but with something much heavier. "She believed this?" she asked, voice shaking. "She saw it long before the rest of us," Anne replied. Catherine looked away, lips pressed tight. "I never wanted this. I just wanted to help." Anne smiled gently. "That's exactly why she chose you." They sat in silence, two women bound by duty and destiny, both shaped by the same matriarch. Catherine folded the letter and held it to her chest. She didn't speak again for several minutes. When she did, her voice was steady. "Then I'll carry it, quietly." Anne stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You already have." Outside, the wind swept through the palace gardens, and inside, the future of the monarchy settled on the shoulders of a woman who never sought the crown, but was born to carry its meaning. The world never heard Queen Elizabeth read those final words aloud. No cameras captured the moment her daughter unfolded the letter. No headlines announced the quiet shift that followed. But those who were close, those who felt the subtle winds change, knew something had turned. The crown had not been passed, but something far more powerful had been entrusted. The heart of the monarchy, not to a king, not to an heir, but to a woman who had never once asked to lead. A woman who won the people, not with grandeur, but with grace. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had become more than a royal figure. She had become the monarch's answer to an uncertain age. Behind palace doors, decisions were made without ceremony. In firelit rooms, truths were whispered, not shouted. And through it all, one woman remained unchanged, calm, composed, and unaware that the world had started to look to her not just as a princess, but as a future. The Queen's voice may be gone, but her vision is still moving through the halls of power. And in the stillness of that vision, one thing remains clear. Sometimes, the most important crowns are not worn on the head, but carried in the quiet strength of those who never needed to be chosen to already belong. The monarchy's future isn't loud, it's her.
What do you think? What will Beatrice do when the true paternity is revealed? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Before you go, be sure to click on the video shown on your screen.